Researchers have discovered new risks with an old technology you may have never heard of.
So Andy, did you see that article about AT commands impacting mobile phones?
I did. That one was really interesting. A group of researchers, University of Florida, Stony Brook University, and Samsung Research of America have actually found that a large number of devices are vulnerable to AT commands being pushed through USB.
Mm-hmm. So for those who are uninitiated, how about you explain AT commands?
Sure. So AT commands are a little bit of an old technology. They're short string commands that are meant to be pushed out to modems. Mm-hmm. Typically they're used for like gathering kind of simple information, subscriber info, things like that.
Some phones actually use AT commands as a more general way to interface with the system as a whole. And you can access these commands, or the terminal that accepts these commands, simply by plugging in a USB cable to the phone.
The list of commands was actually standardized a while back, but vendors have actually implemented vendor-specific commands since then. And that's kind of where the problem lies. So there's a lot of AT commands that are totally benign. They don't present any sort of major issue. It's these specific ones that can actually cause a problem.
Mm-hmm. So the official list of what's possible may not be a complete list. And in some cases, there are commands for specific models of different manufacturers that allow you to do things like change the firmware. So it's a little bit scary.
So the researchers actually found that you can push AT commands to these devices even if the device isn't in debug mode, even if the device is locked. But it depends on the device itself. It depends on its firmware. Essentially what the researchers did is they gathered a whole bunch of firmware images for a lot of modern Android devices, and then they dug through that firmware looking for AT commands. They gathered, I think it was like around 3,500 different AT commands. Wow. They then took those commands and thought like an attacker and used some of them to bypass certain security controls on different devices. Some of the attacks were things like bypassing a lock screen, fumbling with the firmware that's sitting on the device currently, exfilling data from like an SD card or something that's on the device itself. It's a lot of crazy stuff.
They've got a list of the affected firmwares and devices as well. So do we know, are vendors rushing to disable these sorts of things, or what's the takeaway from this?
The takeaway is that the researchers notified all 11 vendors as soon as they discovered what they had discovered. They'd actually worked with those vendors to push out updates and patches.
Okay.
So the problem is very well known and presumably has been addressed.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, I gotta wonder, since this is Android we're talking about, we've talked about Android fragmentation on the show so many times, whether most users will actually see the benefits of these patches. We know that with Android, there's always the fragmentation problem, so older devices may not get patches. Even newer devices, patching is sometimes not a given for some manufacturers.
I do want to mention that in the article that the researchers actually put up a website that lists all the different devices, specific devices. So if you're concerned, you can go on and check for your device, and then, if you don't already, you should update regularly.
What's interesting to me about this is that this isn't a bug. This is a full command set.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right? This isn't like a quote-unquote a vulnerability here. This is legitimate functionality. And it's really interesting to me how a legacy feature set, a legacy technology that kind of fell out of vogue and, really is left, awareness of most people is still there. And it's still operating as a basis in some cases of devices that we use every day.
A lot of the researchers actually mentioned that a lot of the commands that they were discovering in this firmware is completely undocumented. So it might just be a matter of, hey, we didn't think anyone would find these things and actually use them. I mean, obviously, I don't agree with that necessarily.
Yeah, anyone who thinks that hasn't met reverse engineers.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's a good point.
If you have the ability to patch. If not, maybe write a letter to your manufacturer and ask them, hey, when are we going to get patched for this? Because this one's kind of important.